Hello everybody. Myself Ravi Prakash TN, lecturer, Government Polytechnic Sira. Welcome to session 8 of Unit 3, Friction, from the subject Mechanics of Machines. So in previous session we have discussed about single plate or single disc clutch. In previous session we have discussed the constructional details and the working of single plate clutch. In previous session, we have discussed this working in two positions. That is, when this clutch pedal is in released position and when the pressure is applied on this clutch pedal. See, in this position, it is in released position. So during this position, pressure is exerting on this clutch plate by this pressure plate. So because of the pressure exerting by this pressure plate on this clutch plate, there is a contact between, frictional contact between flywheel and this clutch plate. So because of which the power is transmitting from this driving shaft to this driven shaft. When pressure is applied on this clutch plate, what happens? This thrust bearing moves forward and this release lever moves in inward direction, and which makes this knife edge to move in this direction. And because of the movement of this knife edge in outward direction, this stops, pressure plate stops exerting pressure on this clutch plate, exerting pressure on this clutch plate. So because of disengagement of this clutch plate and flywheel, the power will not transmit from the driving shaft to the driven shaft. So ಕ್ಲಚ್ ಪೆಡಲ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟು ಹಿಂದೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ, ಕ್ಲಚ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಫ್ಲೈವೀಲ್ ಜೊತೆ ಈ ಕ್ಲಚ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಡಿಸೆಂಗೇಜ್ ಆಗಿ ಈ ಡ್ರೈವಿಂಗ್ ಶಾಫ್ಟ್ ಇಂದ ಡ್ರಿವನ್ ಶಾಫ್ಟ್ಗೆ ಪವರ್ ಸಪ್ಲೈ ಸ್ಟಾಪ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. This is the working of single plate clutch, what we have discussed in the previous session. On completion of this session, the student should get the knowledge of working of multi-plate clutch. Multi-plate clutches or multi-disc clutches. Previous session ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು single plate clutches discuss ಮಾಡಿದ್ದು. ಇಲ್ಲಿ as the name itself indicates, the clutches with multi-plates. The clutches with multi-plates, which we call them as multi-plate clutches. See, these multi-plate clutches are used when a large torque is to be transmitted. ಇಲ್ಲಿ multi-plates ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ friction ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಹಾಗಾಗಿ large torque ನ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಮಿಟ್ ಮಾಡಬಹುದು. So multi-plate clutches are used when large torque is to be transmitted. And multi-plate clutches are used where compact construction is required. Example, scooters, motorcycles and racing cars. ಅಂದರೆ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಇರುತ್ತಲ್ಲ ಅಂಥ ಜಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ when where compact construction is required, in such cases we use multi-plate clutches. ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಇರುವಂಥ ಜಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ multi-plate clutches ನ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಮತ್ತೆ ರೇಸಿಂಗ್ ಕಾರ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮಲ್ಟಿಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಕ್ಲಚಸ್ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಲಾರ್ಜ್ ಟಾರ್ಕ್ requirement ಇರುತ್ತೆ. So because of the requirement of large torque, these multiplate clutches are used in racing cars also. Now see this animation to understand the working of multiplate clutch.
Multiplate clutches work with several friction discs. Unlike dry friction clutches used in most cars with manual transmissions, where only one friction disc with two friction surfaces is used to transmit power from the engine to the transmission. A multiplate clutch is composed of a series of friction discs that are connected to a shaft. The friction discs have friction surfaces to increase the coefficient of friction. Usually, friction surfaces are made of carbon fiber, sintered bronze, or graphite. Steel discs can be found between the friction discs. These steel discs sit interlocked within the basket. The set of clutch discs is often referred to as a clutch pack. In the current arrangement, the friction and steel discs are forced together by pressure. That is, a rotation of the friction discs will result in a rotation of the steel discs, and vice versa. However, when the discs are no longer engaged by pressure, the friction and steel discs can rotate freely without any impact on each other. Usually, the discs are engaged by pressure through a set of 4 coil springs. These apply pressure on a pressure plate that consequently applies pressure to the clutch pack. Applying pressure to the pressure plate and the coil springs from the other side will release the pressure on the clutch pack. This is usually done by a push rod. This push rod may be connected to a clutch lever that the rider of a motorcycle can use to disconnect the transmission from the engine. Consequently, power is transmitted from engine to transmission when the discs are pressed together, and it is not transmitted when they are separated from one another.
Now let us discuss the constructional details of the multiplate clutch. The flywheel. See, this is the flywheel. This flywheel rotates with engine crankshaft. This is the flywheel. And clutch plates out are called as outside discs attached to flywheel. See, to this internal circumference of the flywheel, the circular plates are attached here, which are called as clutch plates. These clutch plates are with friction lining. Huh? These are the clutch plates which are attached to internal circumference of the flywheel. Pressure plate. Here, this is the pressure plate. This complete portion. This is the pressure plate. This here, here. This is the pressure plate. And inside discs attached to pressure plate. See, these are the inside discs which are attached to the pressure plate. These are the inside discs attached to the pressure plate. Friction lining is present on the clutch plate. Once again, I'm going to repeat. Flywheel and clutch plates are outside discs which are attached to internal circumference of this flywheel. Then the pressure plate and inside discs are attached to the pressure plate, and friction lining material is present on this clutch plate, on both the sides of the clutch plate. This is the spring which is present on the spigot end, which is present inside the pressure plate, which is the extension part of this crankshaft. So this is the clutch pedal. This is with arrangement of fulcrum pin. See, when pressure is applied on this clutch pedal, so this portion moves in anti-clockwise direction or towards this direction. When pressure is applied like this, it moves towards this direction. And this is the driven shaft or clutch shaft. This is the driven shaft or clutch shaft with external splines. It is placed inside the hole of this pressure plate where internal splines are present. See, the engagement of this external spline with internal spline allows the axial movement of this pressure plate on this clutch shaft, and this is the bearing. Now, working of multiplate clutch. When pressure is applied on clutch, see here, when pressure is applied on this clutch, see, because of this fulcrum pin arrangement, this portion tends to move anti-clockwise or towards the in this direction it tends to move. And as this portion is connected to this pressure plate, as this portion is connected to one of the ends of this pressure plate, the pressure plate assembly will tends to move away from the flywheel by compressing this spring. ನೋಡಿ, ಇದು ಈ ಕಡೆ ಮೂವ್ ಆದಾಗ, ಈ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಫಲ್ಕ್ರಮ್ ಪಿನ್ ಅರೇಂಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಇಂದ ಈ ಪೋರ್ಷನ್ ಆಂಟಿ ಕ್ಲಾಕ್ ವೈಸ್ ಡೈರೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅಥವಾ ಈ ಕಡೆ ಮೂವ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಇದು ಈ ಎಂಡು ಈ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಎಂಡ್ಗೆ ಫಿಕ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಈ ಕಡೆ ಮೂವ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಈ ಸ್ಪ್ರಿಂಗ್ ನ ಪ್ರೆಸ್ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ಮೂವ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಮೂವ್ ಆದಾಗ these inner discs, because of the movement of this pressure plate away from the flywheel, the inner discs detaches from the clutch plates. ಏನು ಈ ಕ್ಲಚ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಮತ್ತು ಇನ್ನರ್ ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ ಎರಡು ಎಂಗೇಜ್ ಆಗಿತ್ತು ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಫ್ರಿಕ್ಷನ್, they will be get detached from the clutch plates because of the movement of pressure plate away from the flywheel. When these inner discs detach from the clutch plate because of the movement of this pressure plate away from the flywheel, the transmission of power from this flywheel stops. Means the power will not be transmitted from driver shaft to driven shaft. ನೋಡಿ, ಈಗ ಡ್ರೈವರ್ ಶಾಫ್ಟ್ ರೊಟೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಫ್ಲೈವೀಲ್ ರೊಟೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಮತ್ತು ಕ್ಲಚ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ರೊಟೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕ್ಲಚ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಮತ್ತು ಈ ಇನ್ನರ್ ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ ಎರಡು ಡಿಸ್ಎಂಗೇಜ್ ಆಗಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಇದು ರೊಟೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಿರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಇದು ರೊಟೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಈ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಅಸೆಂಬ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ರೊಟೇಟ್ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಅಸೆಂಬ್ಲಿ ರೊಟೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಈ ಕ್ಲಚ್ ಶಾಫ್ಟ್ ಕೂಡ ರೊಟೇಟ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ when pressure is applied on the clutch, there will be no transmission of power from driver shaft to driven shaft or clutch shaft. ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಈ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಇಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಮೂವ್ ಅವೇ ಫ್ರಮ್ ದ ಫ್ಲೈ ವೀಲ್ by compressing or by pressing this spring. When clutch is released, now assume the clutch is being released. When clutch is being released, so because of this fulcrum pin arrangement, again this portion which has moved or which has dislocated from this position because of the application of pressure, after the release of pressure, again it come back to its original position, which makes this pressure plate to move towards flywheel. Pressure plate will move towards flywheel because of the pressure exerted by this spring. ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಅಪ್ಲೈ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಈ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಈ ಕಡೆ ಮೂವ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾಗ ಈ ಸ್ಪ್ರಿಂಗ್ ನ ಕಂಪ್ರೆಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮೂವ್ ಆಗಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಈ ಕ್ಲಚ್ ಪೆಡಲ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ರಿಲೀಸ್ ಮಾಡಿದಾಗ ಈ ಸ್ಪ್ರಿಂಗ್ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಎಕ್ಸರ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಈ ಪ್ರೆಷರ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ನ ಒರಿಜಿನಲ್ ಪೊಸಿಷನ್ ಗೆ ಪುಷ್ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ. ಆಗೇನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಈ ಇನ್ನರ್ ಡಿಸ್ಕ್ ಮತ್ತು ಕ್ಲಚ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಮತ್ತೆ ಎಂಗೇಜ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಫ್ರಿಕ್ಷನ್ ದೇರ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ಎಂಗೇಜ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಕ್ಲಚ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಅಂಡ್ ದಿ ಇನ್ನರ್ ಡಿಸ್ಕ್. ಸೊ ಇನ್ ದಿಸ್ ಕಂಡೀಷನ್ ವಾಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪನ್ಸ್, the power will be transmitted from the clutch plate to the flywheel to clutch plate and clutch plate to inner disc and inner disc to this pressure plate assembly and then to this clutch shaft. So when clutch is released, the power will be transmitted from crankshaft to the clutch shaft. Spring retracts, pressure plate moves towards the flywheel, and inner disc engages with the clutch plates by friction, and motion is transmitted to driven shaft. So this is the working of a multi-plate clutch. So here I have explained the working under two conditions: when the clutch plate is released and when there is application of pressure or force on this clutch pedal. Now let us discuss some multiple choice questions. Which clutch is known as wet clutch? Options are single plate clutch, multi plate clutch, both A and B, none of the above. ನೋಡಿ, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಮಲ್ಟಿಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಕ್ಲಚ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಂಬರ್ ಆಫ್ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ಸ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಫ್ರಿಕ್ಷನ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಹೀಟ್ ಜನರೇಷನ್ ಪಾಸಿಬಿಲಿಟೀಸ್ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಲೂಬ್ರಿಕೇಶನ್ ನೆಸೆಸಿಟಿ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಮಲ್ಟಿಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಕ್ಲಚ್ ನ ವಿ ಕಾಲ್ ಇಟ್ ಆಸ್ ವೆಟ್ ಕ್ಲಚ್ ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ಆಫ್ lubrication. Next, dash clutches are used where compact construction is required. Single disc, cone, multi-disc, none of the above. The option is, the answer is C, that is multi-disc. Third question, the following is not a friction clutch. Options are fluid clutch, centrifugal clutch, cone clutch, disc clutch. The answer is A. Option A, fluid clutch. The coefficient of friction is high in multi-disc plate clutch. The options are yes, coefficient of friction is less, coefficient of friction is high, None of the listed. The answer is B, that is, coefficient of friction is less. Actually, in multi plate clutches, as there is more friction, it needs lubrication. Because of lubrication, coefficient of friction is less. The clutch used in scooters is multi-plate clutch, single plate clutch, centrifugal clutch, cone clutch. The answer is multi-plate clutch. The friction material of the clutch should have high coefficient of friction, low coefficient of friction, high surface hardness, high endurance limit strength. The answer is A, high coefficient of friction. A dash is used in the transmission of power to shafts and machines which must be started and stopped frequently. Options are brakes, couplings, friction clutch, none of the above. Answer is C, friction clutch. So friction clutches are used in the transmission of power to shafts and machines which must be started and stopped frequently. The friction clutch is fitted between crankshaft and flywheel and transmission system, engine and crankshaft, none of the above. The answer is B, flywheel and transmission system. Commonly used friction lining material in friction clutches is Farado, cork, asbestos, none of the above. The answer is Farado. The power transmitted by the clutches is calculated by P equals T into V, P equals T into N, P equals T into omega, none of the above. The answer is C. This is the assignment question. Explain with a neat sketch multiplate or disc clutch. So these are the names of e-content developers. Thank you.